Welcome to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. Well known throughout the customer leadership industry, Chad has been the chief community leader for Execs in the Know, one of the top executive customer advocacy groups on the planet. With a passion for customer success and a desire to share and develop best practices, Chad's conversations with industry leaders aim to give unfiltered, unplugged access to industry peers who are customer obsessed, just like you. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Now here's your host, Chad McDaniel.
So welcome to Customer Driven podcast episode with Chad McDaniel, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. I first of all want to wish everyone well wishes as we continue through the pandemic, and just thinking of you in your continued pursuit of customer excellence within your organization. So please, as a community member of Execs in the Know, stay well, stay safe. My name is Chad McDaniel. I'm the president of Execs in the Know. If you're not familiar with Execs in the Know, we are a very large corporate CX sharing community, sharing all sorts of insights and ideas around customer success. I would encourage you to go to execsintheknow.com. There's all sorts of information about us, or you can join our private online community. But for me personally, for the last 12 years, it's been my passion driving success in the customer CX community over these years. And I've been absolutely amazed to see the leadership that our industry has and the continued pursuit of excellence that all of you are doing out there. So big kudos. But let's get started. And I'm going to introduce our guest here very shortly, Brian Morin from SmartAction. And it's an absolute thrill to be able to get some of Brian's time. And I want to say thank you very much. But before we introduce Brian, really, when I think of the COVID, how this has forced consumer behavior like never before, the drive towards self-service, conversational AI, digital service, all of the things that have been going on that we are absolutely looking at real time right now, and how this has changed some of the business drivers overall for customer experience. So today, what I'd like to do in this podcast episode, as Brian and I work through this, is not so much the previous state, but kind of where we're at right now, what's sort of the real things taking place that our leaders are struggling with, and how they're managing through this sort of consumer change of behavior in need and push of self-service. So Brian, if we could just, first of all, thank you again. I'd love our audience to know a little bit more about you. If you could just tell us, as the Chief Marketing Officer of SmartAction, a little bit about your role, the company itself. And I know your company's been doing some fantastic things out there in the market.
Sure. No, thanks, Chad. So been here at SmartAction for a while, running marketing here. Of course, we've been involved in your community with Execs in the Know for quite some time, and really close with a lot of the members that are involved in your community. At SmartAction, for those listening in that don't know who we are, or maybe what we're bringing to the table in this conversation in particular, is that we deliver AI-powered virtual agents as a service. And so what that means is that we deliver the full conversational AI technology stack. It's turnkey, it's omni-channel. Most do start voice first for the biggest ROI, also because it's far and away the most complex channel to deliver a great experience. So you might hear that and think that makes us a technology provider or software company, and it does. But where we're different is that we're not just trying to sell software licenses or seats. We actually manage the application for the client as a managed service. And that means everything from the design, the build, the ongoing operation. It's all built in our subscription model. So as much as everyone thinks of SmartAction as an AI company, and I mean, we started as an AI company, that's where our IP is grounded as we mix and match with best of breed in the marketplace. We're really as much of a CX company these days, because we are responsible for the AI-powered CX for more than 100 brands, from the mid-market to the Fortune 1000. And so that CX arm of our company evolve simply because great experiences over voice are really hard to do, and every business is unique. And so we have a team across 8 different CX disciplines that manage all of that. And so, Chad, I think what makes that relevant for our discussion today, as I think as a BPO of sorts for AI self-service, is that we are on the front lines with clients. So we're not just building technology for them and throwing it over the fence and wishing them good luck. We're architecting the customer experience with them to be as frictionless as possible and improve day by day as we pour through data. So what that does is it gives us a front row seat to everything that's been happening right now, and through the lens of all the brands we support, as opposed to maybe just one, from the pandemic to technology trends to business driver priorities.
Well, Brian, thank you for coming on camera today, and I'm trying to personalize as much as I can in our podcast series with our audience. And again, thank you. Let's dig in, and I think let's just quickly go pre-COVID to where we're at now, sure. July 2020, so to speak, as we're recording this episode. So when I think over the years working with the community about self-service, the drive to digital optimization, there was some legacy things that were stalling or things that we were starting to move towards maturity of getting there. There was a whole host of things depending on the type of brand that made that happen or not happen. But now that the COVID has come into play and very unforeseen, obviously, where do you see kind of the before, let's say, March, February timeframe of this year to where we're at now in both consumer behavior, what have you been seeing, but more importantly, company behavior and company need assessment?
Sure. So one thing that we did as a team, Chad, is we sat down and we asked ourselves, what have the real impacts been? Now, we support companies across 12 industries, and we really try to sit down to peel back the onion on what are the 3 or 4 things that have changed that are different. And we were able to very firmly put our finger on 3 areas. Now, one of the biggest areas, though, has to do with the fact that of what COVID has done to accelerate the pace of change. Now, these trends towards self-service have been in play for some time, but what has happened during this time is that consumers have been forced into self-service. Consumer behavior has changed, and it's because it's been forced to change. When your options are wait on hold for 2 hours or try to self-serve, a lot of consumers that weren't doing that are suddenly engaged in doing that and certainly are taking that approach. So what we are seeing is we're seeing that there's nothing new about the trends. What is different is the pace of change that's happening. And a lot of these areas, particularly over the voice channel, Chad, a lot of the let's build in digital first organizations where let's create a digital sandbox and see what happens. When this hit, they were the ones that were going, oh crap, our biggest problem is in voice, and we need a solution for that right now.
So let's clarify for the audience, when you say solution for voice, and you're talking specifically for AI voice, can you give us examples of that, and again, just for our listeners?
Yeah, well, so maybe sometimes from the outside looking in, that what not everyone knows is that the development cycle to build a decent chatbot is very different than the development cycle to build a really good voice experience. A lot of one of the things that not every contact center leader knows this, and certainly if they haven't gone down the path of conversational AI, it's still a little bit of a black box, so to speak. And so to unpack that a little bit is to understand that voice is a very difficult channel to design and build a really good bot. There's an enormous amount of complexity and customization that goes into building a good conversational experience over voice. There's the CX design process, there's pouring through recordings, establishing handling rules, you're identifying intents and utterances, you're training language models, both on the recognition piece and then also on the cognition piece to piece all of that together. And it's an 8-week development cycle. There's no shortcut to doing voice well, but you can stand up a decent chatbot pretty quickly. I have actually a good example of this. We were approached by a national medical nonprofit to stand up a national COVID-19 hotline. They wanted to triage patients and create an escalation path for those who needed it, simply because nurses were getting inundated. 60 calls an hour from everyone with a cough or a fever when all of this was starting. And so they were stuck doing that instead of patient care. And most of those calls, they're information related or they're triage related. So there just had to be a smarter way of doing that than requiring a human on the other end of the line. So what you want is a bot who can answer any litany of questions, triage patients, and then create that escalation path to a medical professional for assistance if they clearly need it. So there was no way that we could build that type of voice application and time frame that they wanted. Again, even after you get your ducks in a row, you're still looking at an 8-week development cycle. So we came up with a pretty creative solution to build a channel switching experience to redirect to a chatbot that we could build in 2 weeks instead of 8. So when callers would call in, they would call into the 800 number line. We would offer to send them a text link to a help center where they could get help immediately. And when faced the option between getting help immediately and having to wait on hold for 2 hours, it's amazing the number of consumers that will try to get help immediately. And so then we could issue the SMS, they would click that, and we would send them to a rich web chat experience with a chatbot that could ask questions, deliver the NLP, the image carousels to click options, triage, and then schedule a time for a callback with a medical professional if needed.
So Brian, SmartAction I know works with over like 100 brands right now and on the text, chat, voice, and so forth. This sort of accelerated speed and shift of speed need, are you seeing that across certain type of vertical or industry? Do you have any suggestions or insight on that where you've seen the push? Sure. Or has it been consistent across?
Well, so the ones that we saw immediately, Chad, were the ones that had unexpected call spikes and questions. A lot of organizations, as they were going into the pandemic time, they were suffering their own agent availability and with their own stay-at-home orders. And then suddenly there comes through a spike, and I mean a crazy spike across certain interactions that contact center leaders could not have prognosticated. You would go from low volume to such high volume. And so now contact center leaders are having to play this what if scenario. In the case of a pandemic, what happens? We just did a virtual event with Choice Hotels. They're the umbrella brand for nearly every budget hotel chain out there, and we handle all of their reservations, but we also do some other outlier call types that don't get as much volume. Well, some of those outlier call types that we were handling, and mind you, we had just went live with this application just months before the pandemic. They were seeing an increase over 400% across some of those interactions. And so they came out and did a session and spoke out that had they not trained the virtual agent to handle those interactions prior to the pandemic, they would have suffered a tremendous amount of revenue loss because they were suffering agent availability and long hold times already. They could not have handled the additional pressure that would have been put on that. So we've seen an enormous influx from there. We've seen an enormous influx, particularly from brick and mortar, where you can imagine a lot of those customer service interactions are from brick and mortar related. A good example of that was Designer Shoe Warehouse. They saw a huge spike in calls related to returns or order status, since there were order delays due to disruptions in distribution. Anybody who had a disruption in distribution or logistics was getting inundated with calls or chats. Now, for those brick and mortar businesses, those are typically human brick and mortar experiences. But the moment that it's taken away, guess what they do? They call. And so that just put an enormous amount of pressure to ensure that those interactions across the voice channel are covered in a world of AI where you have something that's always on in an instance where you could suffer agent availability or just call spikes in certain interactions that you can't scale agents for.
So I want to keep our listeners in mind, and I want to, give some scenarios here. And also, there still could be some people on the fence that are in disagreement to what we're discussing right now. So let's, Brian, go with the hypothesis I think you're advocating and saying and suggesting. And again, I trust your thought leadership because you're in the front lines. I hope so. You're in the front lines of all of this. Absolutely.
And I should say, we just do what our customers tell us to do. And we're able to sit here and just kind of from that purview, what our customers been asking for, that's what we can share.
Yeah, and that's the insight, Brian, that's so important. And I really appreciate you jumping on to us to give us that real-time reflection. So back to the hypothesis, consumer behavior is an all-time rapid pace of change. We're all consumers ourselves. based on shifting needs and staffing models and capability to support those staffing models, we still have to support our consumer because CX plays such a competitive role in differentiating of competitiveness depending on the brand and nature of the brand. And you're saying that our consumers are more so forced than ever or leaning towards this sort of self-service, conversational powered AI, if it's through bots or through voice, whatever it may be. Is that, first of all, is that a correct assumption?
Well, so we would call that a correct assumption just because of what we see as a changing landscape across all the brands that we support is they are competing on CX, Chad. CX is now a battleground of where you are competing. And I think that there's been a greater emphasis on understanding that over the last few years. But the other thing that's been taking place during that same period of time on that realization is understanding that a large part of that CX that you're competing on, it's no longer a human-to-human interaction. It's a human to AI or human to machine interaction. And so where contact center leaders have been maybe experts in workforce management, they've been experts in human-to-human interactions, it's requiring an upskilling to be an expert in that human-to-machine experience, because that's where that battleground is taking place, and understanding how do you best weave your machine, AI resources with your human resources, because they are now more interwoven, more than ever. Like I can give a really good example on this, Chad. Prior to the pandemic, we did a rollout with AAA to automate their emergency roadside assistance service. That used to be a 100% human-to-human interaction. And it's now a 100% human-to-AI interaction. And that's quite a shift for an organization like that, because they're a top 25 most trusted brand. And they built that reputation on delivering great service. But today, the virtual agent handles everything, all the triage related to uncovering their roadside assistance issue, identifying the make and model of their vehicle, the exact location where they're stranded, find and dispatch the nearest tow relative to the type of service that they need, and then keep the driver updated on ETA. So this is a massive shift, that what their brand is now competing on is this human to AI interaction. So for them, and of course, the business driver for them, Chad, it wasn't, hey, we need to compete on CX. That has always been there. It was related to a business continuity challenge. The problem they faced was very much pandemic-like. They couldn't forecast the weather, so you can't scale agents up, on an oncoming winter storm. So it puts the onus on business continuity challenges that require virtual agents that are perfectly trained and always on.
A couple more things down that path, and I want to get on the opposite side of this conversation for that audience. Brian, what typically, from a cost per call, cost per incident, are you seeing or suggesting in the traditional human-to-human versus human-to-machine?
Well, so we have 18 published case studies on our website that have a breakdown of all of that across those brands that we support, and depending on what their cost per minute or cost per conversation is, customers of ours come out and find that they can deliver an AI-powered CX at 1/10 to 1/3 the cost. The AAA example that I just mentioned, when in the middle of March, when we were at its peak. We did a virtual event with AAA because they talked about how they had the pandemic of winter storms, business continuity that they need to roll this out to. And that business driver had nothing to do with cost savings. It was 100% related to business continuity. But after they did the rollout, they were happy to attest that they saw a 2/3 cost savings against their operational budget, which, frankly, to some extent, segues into this other emerging trend that we've seen coming from the pandemic. It is this emergence of recession proofing as a strategy.
And I'm assuming in the ability, if it gets complex in the call, that they can virtually or seamlessly get back to a live agent to fully support, and it's a seamless experience. I'm assuming that would be the case.
It is, yeah. We all have to be able to have a transfer to a live agent immediately with context, so that live agent pick up right where the conversation left off if the virtual agent is unable to contain, or maybe it just goes outside the guardrails that was designed for the virtual agent to handle.
One of the things I hear very frequently in the community is obviously want to be very self-disclosing if we are dealing with an automation of some sort that's transparent within the caller. And a lot of times as a consumer, I don't mind dealing with a bot or dealing with that intelligent aspect as long as it's intuitive enough. But the concern I hear a lot is about how do you maintain that brand identity? How do you maintain that sort of sense of personalization? How do you maintain the level of that one-to-one contact sophistication, and just really trying to make that moment of truth as meaningful? I mean, at the end of the day, consumers want resolution. They want their problem resolved, but you still have that opportunity to impact through some sort of influences or intent.
So I think, Chad, that this gets back to what we were talking about earlier is, part of what's changed, in this, I don't want to call it post-COVID. We're not post-COVID, but we're in a post-COVID reality. And a lot of that sinking back to, well, what's different about, the skill required of a contact center leader going into the future? And it is what you are mentioning. It's this fact that moments matter. As a consumer, your time matters, and your time matters a lot. We're all consumers. And the moment that a situation arises that we know we have to contact customer service, there's not a single one of us that are happy about it. Invariably, we start from the disposition of displeasure. And so when we call in, over voice or we engage over chat, we're starting from a place of tension. So if you're using an automated system, at that front door, and this is and particularly it's the AI powered aspect that gives you the ability to do something with that tension that you couldn't do otherwise. The most important thing that you have to do is you have to do something that de-escalates that tension. And what do I mean? If you're starting from the disposition of tension, you call in and you have to listen to a long, lengthy, press one phone tree menu, or you have to sit there and listen to every prompt available to you. What's happened to your attention? It's gone up. If you call in and you realize you have to wait on hold for an unknown period of time, since no self-service option is available to you, what's happened? Your tension has gone up. If you call in and you get greeted with a bot that sounds like a robot, a bot who knows nothing about you, what's happened to your tension? You were already at a 6 before you even called. And so your tension is now at a 7 or even an 8, because now before you've even tried the attempt to self-service, you're, oh crap. So moments matter. And a lot of customers, they might interact with you just once over the course of an entire year. So that one moment, it matters. And since that moment matters, you have to show that you respect somebody's time. So we're always looking for ways that we can personalize a conversation, ways, Chad, that we can predict the conversation and deliver the most frictionless experience. I mean, do you know what it does to your attention when an automated system or virtual agent sounds like a human, knows who you are, knows what you might be calling about? The fact that you can tell that it's an intelligent system greatly boosts your confidence and your willingness to interact with that system. And ironically enough, even if the virtual agent, say, is wrong, about what it is that you're calling about, the fact that it knew from a high probability that might be what you were calling about gives that caller a good clue that this system knows something about you and makes it much more apt to attempt self-service.
Let me play the opposite side of the argument here, Brian. Let's say I'm a brand that has hospitality that has been substantially affected by volume droppage or volume intent in there. Where does this come in? Why is this important to consider? I mean, I've got excess capacity that I'm struggling with, and I mean, where does that argument come into play?
Well, I think that argument comes into play first just by looking at what is it that your live agents are doing. You're taking a realistic look at what are the buckets of call types or chat types that they're actually handling, and asking yourself, should a human really be handling that? And what can you do? This is not just a bottom line, cost savings or CX conversation. This is an employee experience conversation. We know that the number one issue that contact center leaders face is dealing with churn. And so the more that you can just begin to offload the transactional, call types where you're triaging, you're asking a few questions, you're gathering information, you're taking some sort of action. I mean, Chad, we we had an instance where there was a CEO who sat down, and he did a flight to the Philippines to see, what does their live agent actually do? And after he went through the mind-numbing, 35th product registration, he's like, my goodness, we have to do something, not just to automate this for the sake of the savings. It has to do with the fact that we have to be able to allow our humans to be upskilled to handle what only humans should do, so their jobs are a little more creative, a little more interesting, and feeling like they're delivering more of a value add than sitting there turning a page to a magazine reading while they're doing the call.
Brian, is your argument or is your advocacy that this is a pure cost play only opportunity? Is this a customer satisfaction play? What is your, you've got a lot of people watching this right now. I mean, what is your argument of this play? Consumer demand, consumer need?
Well, so if you'd asked me this a year ago, we would say it's a cost play. Now, CX has always been table stakes. So it hasn't been as much of a CX conversation, Chad. CX is table stakes. The CX has to be as good as a live agent, or we're just not going to do it. We need to know that we can handle that interaction as good or better than a live agent, or we're going to treat it radioactive and say it doesn't belong in the threshold for change. So the drivers have been on the cost-saving side to where how can you be more efficient? But Chad, that has changed enormously in the last few months, where organizations have come to us with their challenge being around business continuity. Every contact center had business continuity plan in place. What they didn't think about was starting with AI as the actual cornerstone to that business continuity plan. Because what happened is that we were in a situation with our customers where we had a situation of the haves and the have-nots. We had a situation of those who had, and boy, oh boy, were they glad that they had it. And we had a situation where we had customers who were even in the pipeline, kind of behind the velvet or behind the velvet rope, waiting for us to get to their application and build it, and they simply didn't have it. And it was no longer a cost-saving conversation anymore. It was a business continuity conversation. And with all the uncertainty in the market and looking at furloughing agents, retraining agents, the possibility of having to furlough agents again and try to retrain again, the cost and effort to do something like that is just absolutely enormous. And so we're just seeing organizations looking at taking the AI approach first, not for cost savings, but because it needs to support their business continuity plan and deliver on the new battleground of CX, which is, AI powered.
I could not agree 100% more than what you just said on the business continuity needs and plannings. And a lot of us got caught off guard for obvious reasons, but we have the opportunity to change and move forward. I want to wrap up with this. Our time always goes so fast, but I want to get to some predictions and recommendations. So, Brian, we're recording this in July of 2020. We're about 5 to 6 months into the current pandemic. Where in this nature of the discussion we've been having, let's look forward even 6 months from now. Let's not even worry about a year. 6 months from now, where do you think we're going to be in this migration path if we were having this same sort of conversation? Where do you think we're going to see about adoption, migration, business continuity planning, acceptance, all of the things?
So I think that this, Chad, I don't know. And that's simply because I think that there is so much uncertainty, with what's happening out there in the marketplace. I mean, we know that these trends toward, self-service, we know that they are only going to continue to, trend further and further as we see improvements in cost efficiency, as we see improvements in capabilities. There's nothing about that that's going to surprise me. How quickly that trends or how far that penetrates is certainly a little bit of the unknown. I think part of the really emerging conversations right now that are taking place, some of the most interesting conversations right now is how are you going to go about it? I think everybody, even if they're not doing it, they have already accepted it as a path of inevitability. But as you go down that path, there's two distinct forks in that road going down that path. One in the landscape has evolved to clear two distinct choices where you didn't have these two choices before is kind of the classic buy versus build conversation. Is this something that you want to tackle as a do-it-yourself option? There are do-it-yourself software platforms that are emerging, which means you're building out your own internal team across different CX disciplines, across different AI disciplines to build that out. Or do you look toward outsourcing and plays like we do where we fit in on the managed services side. So we see a lot more of the conversations, Chad, not just being about what is it that you're doing, but strategically, how are you going about it? And that's the conversation that will be changing over the next 6 months.
Perfect, and thank you for that. And maybe we should revisit in 6 months and see where we've taken some things. Let's end on some recommendations, Brian. I always like to leave on a very thoughtful, positive sort of way of thinking. I'm a CX leader listening to this episode today. What would be your recommendations? What would be your mindful thinking? I know it's kind of a broad question, but what would be the words of encouragement and suggestions you would leave me with as we wrap up the episode?
Sure. I would say that if you know that there's opportunity to penetrate self-service within your organization, I know that and every organization is different. Selling an initiative like this can sometimes be akin to you're trying to push a healthcare bill through Congress. Is this aligned to your overall strategic initiatives, and how so? Do you fight this conversation at the highest levels with purely on ROI and cost savings and CX, or is this more of a shifting conversation to business continuity and recession proofing as a strategy? But Chad, if we were to say, where can somebody start and take away this? Sometimes someone from the outside looking in can say this almost looks like walking the plank. There's like being on Earth, where there is touchstone, and there's being on Mars, where you're having conversations with machines, and the distance or disparity between those two things can look so distant that what's seen in the middle is risk. We're going to spend all the money, the time, and effort to get there, and when we land, will we crash? Will it even work? And so, the best advice that I can give for anybody is to start small. This is not there's no way that you're going to get on a rocket ship and make your way to Mars. What you have to do is you have to start small with the areas that are the absolute no-brainers for self-service opportunity. Demonstrate that you're delivering a great CX. Demonstrate that you're getting that 3-month ROI out of the investment that you made into it, and then you can begin to grow and expand from there. What's different from an IVR touchstone experience is that's just design, build, and poof, you're done. In the world of conversational AI, you're trying to have conversations with the machines, and conversations are enormously complex. And there's no such thing as design, build, and done. It's design, build, and you just started your journey, because now it's the ongoing iterative process of improving and perpetual improvement, and knowing what you need to do to contain more and expand to other grammars or intents and utterances, and so it's just finding where to start.
And I think you mentioned earlier with your guys' sort of condensed 2 weeks to build voice, gives a real easy reflection to try, learn, pilot, and gain from. So there's lots of ways to get creative at the end of the day. Brian, our time always goes so quickly, and I really want to say thank you from the execs in the community. For our listeners, Brian Morin, he is the Chief Marketing Officer at SmartAction. And one thing I'll suggest with Brian, he's in the Los Angeles area. Brian, I know you're so willing to give of your time. If anyone in the community would just like to pick your brain on some ideas or anything you've heard today, there's no arm twist here. Brian's more than willing to kind of share his thoughts, his ideas, maybe some suggestions for you. So if you need to reach Brian, you can reach out to me, Chad McDaniel, or chad@execsintheknow.com, or you can find Brian on LinkedIn. And Brian, I know you'll take good care of the community members. So on behalf of myself, Chad McDaniel, thank you for listening to today's episode, another customer-driven episode of Execs to Know. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Be safe. Keep customer first. And we'll look forward to more conversations. Thank you, Brian.
Yep. No, absolutely. Thank you, Chad. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. It really makes a difference in helping others find the podcast. For more information on our customer experience community, please visit execsintheknow.com.